this voice inside my head was attacking me every day.
When did you start to recognize that 8 inches between the ears was the real battle?
I thought I was physically tough as a football player and as a fullback. It's like that position is synonymous with toughness, right? And I thought that it made me automatically mentally tough, and I was wrong. The whole idea is that we're all fighting this war for mental fitness, right? And that the mental part of combat is incredibly important. I had some familiarity with it, but like a lot of leaders, I didn't know how to train my soldiers.
Welcome back to the You Potential Podcast. Today, my guest is Andy Riise. His experience brought him to fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he earned Bronze Stars and served along Special Forces. Then he traded the battlefields for the NFL sidelines, where he now is the Chicago Bears Director of Mental Performance and Leadership. He calls himself a strength coach for the brain, and his message is simple. Mental toughness isn't something you're born with, it's trained. For all of us business owners and leaders and parents, it's a wonderful concept is that we can train our mental toughness that allows us to experience this life in such deeper and richer ways. Before we get into this episode, I'd like to ask you a favor. Can you share this podcast with a family, friend, or colleague, someone you think who would enjoy these conversations? And subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd really appreciate it. And now, I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Andy Riise. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to chat with you. You got me all fired up talking about the Las Vegas Golden Knights as they're blocking the Edmonton Oilers from getting their coach, but I'm going to put that aside, and I can't wait to talk about you. So welcome.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Great to get to know you a little bit, and thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for everybody who's listening in.
Yeah. So I want to talk about mental fitness and your belief and your ethos of how it's trainable.
Yeah.
But before, I wanted to talk about art. I understand you're an artist.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. You did your homework. Nice job. Yeah.
When you're painting, like really into it, hours into a piece, who are you in that moment?
I'm just totally in the zone, man, in the flow state. And it's ironic because we'll talk about this later, that I talk about the zone being overrated, but there are kind of like truly zone moments that are really hard to replicate, and they kind of catch you. And then there's kind of like these little, I call them zone light, zone heavy, like kind of, pick a beer type beer, or Coke, Diet Coke, right? Versus heavy Coke, right? So there's, but like, I'm definitely in that zone light phase when I'm completely immersed in the moment. I'm listening to my music, totally, present moment focus. Everything becomes easy. It's very clear to me. I'm able to take, the image, my hand strokes are smooth. And I just kind of feel, those endorphins firing, and it's just this optimal performance moment for me when, and it doesn't happen all the time because it's especially it's a process, right? But when I'm in it and I'm flowing and it's coming, the painting is coming together and coming to life. Those are just really special moments for me. I wish that I'd spent more time doing it because I love it so much, but it's definitely a part of my life that I want to do, in my third act. I'm in my second act right now, but as things evolve and my kids move on from our house, I want to spend a lot more time integrating art into, what I love to do as a teacher, coach, and facilitator.
Fascinating. Let's imagine every sports team in the United States and Canada had an Andy painting in it. What would that painting represent?
Oh man. It's a good question. So this is on my mind. It would be a painting of an arena. That's what it would be. And that arena represents my model and my system about that really starts with the foundation. So think of the Pantheon. You ever been to Rome, Italy,
No, I have
Sean?
not. No.
So the Pantheon is this amazing structure that's thousands of years old, that's lived the test of time, and it represents this whole human operating system that I'm all about, right? And so that represents this blueprint on how to build, character, mental fitness, connections, leadership, and also sustain cultures of excellence. And so it would be a painting of, that arena, and it's different than the actual um Colosseum, for example. That's where gladiators,
Mhm.
participated and fought, and it was brutal and it was all about sport, so forth, right? But this is an actual structure that, you perform and you can live and you can celebrate and worship in, right? And so the foundation is character, right? That's your values, your beliefs, your purpose. The four pillars that rest on that are the four C's of mental fitness that I teach: confidence, control, commitment, and challenge. There's a architectural term. It looks like a triangle that sits over that. That's connection. So beyond self, that's the connection between human beings. And then the dome that sits over it is really the culture, right? Which is the character of the organization. And then how do you build and sustain winning cultures, right? In that kind of feed kind of this ecosystem, right? So I would have a painting of that that arena, for everybody to have to remind them about that human operating system that helps you not only build great people but great organizations.
This painting sounds amazing. It's like encapsulates so many dynamics of the
Yeah,
human condition
yeah.
and leadership and performance. Wow.
Yeah,
I can't
absolutely
wait to
too, and
see
that's
it.
that's my visual, and I'm writing a book right now. Working title is Step into the Arena, and it's all about the human operating system for character, mental fitness, and leadership under pressure.
Mm. I like this. I'm a sports guy too. I like this visual cue that I get when I hear "step into the arena." It's like armoring up. I'm getting ready for whatever the
Yeah,
task at hand is.
yeah, absolutely, and it's interesting. And the people that I've worked with, from high performers to everyday heroes, right? There's really three types of people that I've found, Sean, in my life. So the arena represents where we perform, not necessarily where we live, right? But it's interesting. The one type person is someone who's lost. They're kind of in between arenas, like they're transitioning, they're going through some sort of challenge, change in arena. They're in the wrong arena, or they're moving from arenas, and they're in the wrong relationship, they're in the wrong job, they're in the wrong career. They're trying to figure out who they are, and so they're transitioning, right? And then the second version is the people who show up as spectators, right?
Mm,
And the spectators are kind of the people who do that on purpose, or they're not intentional because they don't treat their what they do as a husband, father, or parent, or spouse, or in their career. They don't treat it like a performance. When they go to work or they show up as a parent at home, they don't treat what they're doing with intention, right? And so they show up unintentionally very passive or leaving a lot to chance. And then, in the crowd, some people are even critics, right? They like to criticize the other people and be haters who are actually in the arena. And then the third group of people is the people who are actually in the arena, right? And this is an homage to Teddy Roosevelt's famous speech, which is titled Citizens in the Republic. And everybody knows the man in the arena. And I've changed that to the performer in the arena. And you see this over my shoulder here. And this is really key to my philosophy, right? Is that, hey, the credit belongs to the performers who are in the arena, right? And they're the ones that are willing to try and to fail and put themselves out there and constantly try to get better. So the people that I work with, generally, it's people who have made the choice to get into the arena. But what I'm encouraging people to do is some people don't even know what the arena is. So I'm trying to
mm.
invite them to step into the arena, and the people who are in the cheap seats that, hey, they want to dare greatly. I want them to step into the arena, right? And then not only to perform, but to then recover and take those lessons learned and then bring them back to where they live and they recover to live a happier, more fulfilling, life.
Andy, I love this visual cue that you paint as you talk about this. And yeah, that man in the arena speech it's phenomenal. And I like how you've really integrated this. As you talk about this, Andy, and you think
Yeah.
about different seasons, I'm assuming everyone has it if they're
Yeah.
spectator or in the arena.
Right.
Is there a time that you found yourself in the wrong arena and you had to do some soul searching to find Andy's arena?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have. It's, specifically since I've retired, so I was in the military for, 20 years, I counted 25 years, being in the military to include my time at West Point. And so that's all I knew. And I found that, specific professions whose careers are more of a lifestyle where it encapsulates you personally, professionally, the blends, being a soldier, and I think a lot of athletes can relate to this, people who are in uniform services, to where you have a lifestyle that encompasses you and your family. You really have to be a level of commitment and sacrifice that's different than people who work a 9 to 5, not to take away from anybody else. But when you transition, you go through this identity change and challenge. And a lot of people think about, where am I going to go and what am I going to go do to make a living wage? And they don't think about, who am I?
Mm.
And I think that I had the opportunity to do that, but then you got to iterate and explore it, and you got to use these design thinking principles to be able to figure out, hey, I don't know what I don't know. So I have to go from unconsciously incompetent to consciously, incompetent. Then I know what I don't know by experimenting with some things. And I went through some experiments. I think I was lucky to have my first job, my first real paying job outside of the military was Major League Baseball with the Cincinnati Reds, and it was really interesting because I was coming out of the pandemic. I'd spent 20 years at war, either deploying to Iraq or Afghanistan or coming back and getting ready to deploy. I spent a lot of time in the field or away from my family while my wife is raising our 4 kids. And so now I get on in baseball. I'm living my big league dream. I grew up as a sports fan like you, and I love football and baseball and basketball, but I always dreamed of going and playing in the big leagues, and baseball was one of my first loves. And here I am living my dream, I'm in Major League Baseball, and I absolutely love doing the work. I love being around the players, love being around the coaches. It felt like it was the perfect transition for me. But the one thing that was challenging about it is I was away from my family, and that was the most important thing for me. So in terms of, putting my family first, the reason I retired is to spend more time with my family, especially as my kids were becoming teenagers. My wife wanted to go back to work. She had sacrificed all those years for me. And so now I was away from them 25 out of 30 days. It was really hard on me physically, mentally. And I was still unpacking a lot of things that I had ignored for 25 years. And so had to make the hard decision to, hang up my cleats and after a season and pivot away. And that was a really hard decision. I took what I thought was a great job at Texas A&M University, working in defense and innovation. So I was closer to home, had more time with my family. I had more flexibility. It was a hybrid job. It was only an hour up the road. I loved Texas A&M and M and the ecosystem, but I didn't love what I was doing. I was working on big strategic projects that had to do with things like hypersonic weapons and large autonomous vehicles. And I wanted to work on human performance things. And I want to develop relationships and, help solve hard problems that dealt with things like traumatic brain injury and how to optimize the brain and heal the brain and, those types of things. And I just wasn't able to spend enough time doing that. And I miss being at the tactical level and coaching and being around athletics and being around high performing teams. That was the other thing about Texas A&M. I was literally by myself. I mean, I interacted with a lot of people, but I was an army of one in this huge ecosystem that's Texas A&M University, and it was kind of lonely. So, I again, like, if I had, those are two experiments that I ran that were very different in terms of meeting my needs and my values and what was important to me. But then I had to figure out how to balance those two things to really kind of not only be my best self, but really serve my family and what I need in terms of my health and fitness first as well too, to show up for other people, make a living wage, but really make an impact that I wanted to make.
Thank you for that story. I'm really curious. So you get out of the military. It's a big transition, as you talked to. You
Yeah.
taking off that uniform for the last time. I don't know if they're actually officially a last time, but like your
Yeah.
last day of employment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which part of Andy, or which strength of Andy, had you getting out of, to use your words earlier, the cheap seats to come
Yeah.
down to this this arena that actually has a lot of tension of, like, I want to flourish, or I want to
Yeah.
thrive in my own personal satisfaction with
Right.
working outside of the military,
Yeah.
but yet I want to be a family guy and I want to be attuned to my wife and her needs
Right.
and my kids.
Yeah.
Which part of you was able to listen to that and not just sit back? Because I'm assuming 20 years in the military, some people
Yeah.
might just sit back and enjoy the cheap seats.
Yeah, and you're right, and too, and I think it's interesting, the higher you go in the military, the further you are removed from the pointy end of the spear, right? In terms of leadership, right?
Hmm.
So there's a couple things. One that I learned about myself pretty early on in my career, that my first command, that I knew that I didn't want to be a battalion commander. I didn't want to be as a lieutenant colonel in '05. I didn't want to be a battalion commander. I wanted to be a teacher. And halfway through my career, when I could taught at West Point and was a part of, really groundbreaking health and human performance programs. That's where I found positive psychology, which I know we're gonna get into. But I love teaching and I love coaching. I didn't know I was a coach. I hadn't made that leap yet, but I thought I wanted to be a teacher. But I also knew that I was a very my biggest impact was the closer I am to people, the more impact I can make, and the more that was extrapolated by scale as a senior leader, the less impactful I was and less effective that I was, right? So I knew that I did not want to be an organizational level leader within the military, right? And so I think that was number one. So the closer I am in the arena to the team, even if I'm on the sidelines,
Mm.
the more effective that I'm going to be. Second thing that I realized was that I'm okay being a support guy. I'm okay being the guy behind the sidelines. And I learned this when I was working with elite special forces units. Half of those units, so the operators, the players who are in the arena are Green Berets, right? And their main job is to, do unconventional warfare, and do security force assistance. So their job is they actually create insurgencies, they actually train, advise, and assist foreign militaries, right? And so they deploy all over the world to be able to do that. Well, the people that support them are also special operations. They're support folks. I was not a Green Beret. I was a paratrooper. I was very skilled in what I did as a JTAC, a joint terminal attack controller, and helping with the targeting process, which is all about changing behaviors. So I had a skill set that I brought to bear to add to the team, but I was not. It was kind of like in the NFL or in the NHL. I was not the one who was actually playing the game. I was supporting the players who are in the game. And that was the first time where I made that shift where I was not the guy who was in the arena. I was the guy who was on the sidelines
Mm.
in the arena. And I had tension with that, right? And I was like, okay, so I know I don't want to be a big organizational guy. It's too far away from the point end of the spear. Um, but now now I'm not on the tip of the spear at all, right? But how can I still be on the cutting edge of the spear, right? And then for how can I create more spears? And so how can I train and create more spears as a mentor, as a trainer, as an educator, and so on and so forth. So those were fundamental shifts that I had. And so then those later on allow me to, as I got more depth and expertise into deciding I wanted to be a coach and then identified with a coach, what does that look like? And what arenas do I want to be a coach in? A coach meaning that I'm a teacher, I'm a trainer, I'm a facilitator, I'm a mentor, and me, that was how I could bring my best self, while being okay with, I am no longer in a phase of my career, my life where I need to be the guy in the arena. I'm the guy who's on the sidelines, who's supporting the ones who are actually up front. And so that's been the evolution of things.
I just hear a lot of acceptance and very attuned to the changing seasons, so to speak. And coming out of the military, I've seen other individuals um, share the discipline approach that, from the outsider, we see that is required in the military. Discipline,
Yeah.
discipline,
Yeah. That's what we think
and
of, right? Yeah.
that's what we think of. And as I'm hearing this story, I hear a lot of like acceptance, almost surrender to some part. Like I'm
Yeah.
surrendering that I'm going to be on
Right.
the sidelines, and that's
Yes.
where I'm best fit right now.
That's right. I'm a support guy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm a guide. I'm a guide on the side.
Like,
I'm not a sage. I'm not the sage on the stage. I'm the guide on the side. Yep.
and it makes me think of something that I've heard you say that. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it makes me think of this line that you said that the hardest battles you fought weren't in Iraq or Afghanistan; they were in the 8 inches between your ears.
Yes.
When
Yes.
did you start to recognize that 8 inches between the ears was the real battle?
No, for sure. And this is well documented in my TED Talk. Thank you for watching that too. And so the whole idea is that we're all fighting this war for mental fitness, right? And that, you know, um, our mind is where the battlefield is, the front lines, and we have the ability to be able to train, fight, and win that war, right? One thought, one action, one person at a time. I first realized that when I was a cadet at West Point and I was just getting my butt kicked in this 47-month crucible called the U.S. Military Academy that's designed to be this pressure cooker, right? And just in when I was there, I thought I was because I was physically tough as a football player and as a fullback. It's like that position is synonymous with toughness, right? And I thought that it made me automatically mentally tough, and I was wrong. And because I was quickly humbled by the challenges of not only dealing with the academics, and doing engineering and math and science that I was not good at, dealing with the full time job that is playing college football at the highest level, and oh by the way, you're trained to become a military officer in this extremely regimented environment, right? That has a lot of demands on it, and you're just like anybody else. You don't get special treatment because you're a Division I football player. So I think, and I was constantly comparing myself to my classmates. They're the best of the best, right? And I had imposter syndrome. Where I questioned myself: Do I belong here? And do I have what it takes? Should I be doing something else? Am I going to fail? And I think this voice inside my head was attacking me every day, especially my sophomore year. And then football was my kind of my island in the storm. And when I switched positions, and that just really took the rug out from underneath me. Luckily, my coach referred me to a unique student support center called the West Point Center for Enhanced Performance. That's where sport and performance psychology came into the military in 1989. So fast forward, this is just another student support center, a resource that I took advantage of. I started working one-on-one with Captain Carl Olsen, who had his master's degree in sports psychology, and he started teaching me about mental toughness. And I developed how to develop confidence despite setbacks, and how to concentrate amidst distractions, how to overcome challenges and deal with stress, how to be goal oriented, right? And then how do I put that in action, not only academically and athletically, but also militarily? How do you develop them as skills? And that was transformational to me, and it helped me move from survival to resilient, from resilient to thriving, eventually graduating. And then but it really came to a head after 9/11 happened. After I graduated, 100 days later, 100 days after I graduated, and now we're in a peacetime army to a wartime army. And now 18 months later, I'm newly married, and I'm leading a platoon of soldiers in Iraq. And I think it was something that I wasn't prepared for, and to be mentally agile, make good decisions in combat. As a young man who's still figuring out who he is, was very challenging. It was also very challenging for our unit because it was something we were all learning things for the first time in real time, especially when the insurgency started showing up, and we're talking about, an enemy that is not going to fight toe to toe with us because we have overwhelming firepower. They're using sniper fire, they're using roadside bombs, and we weren't prepared for that. And they hide amongst the people. It's not a linear fight to where, you're going up against each other. So the tactics that worked for the previous war, Desert Storm, were not working in this war, and no one was prepared for that. And so then, luckily, we all came home and we came back. But as we were preparing to go back again, we realized again, like, hey, I know what I know what I don't know. And I realized then that, hey, the mental part of combat is incredibly important. I had some familiarity with it, but like a lot of leaders, I didn't know how to train my soldiers. So that really planted the seed to where I'm at today, which is all about helping, more leaders, more performers, more teams learn how to train their mind like their body and craft. Because, you may not be in combat, but everybody's fighting this war for mental fitness. And if we can learn how to train our minds like our body and craft, and we get it out of the elite populations into the hands of people earlier in their lives through sport, or earlier in their careers in business, you think about the implications on, our overall well-being. I think that's where I'm at. And it's a little bit innovative. It's a little bit ahead of its curve, but it's something I'm passionate about. And I hope will be my legacy.
Mm. Thank you for that story. Can you actually give an example of, I'm hearing you trained for almost the wrong war, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
They set you up, or not they set you up, the wrong war. You didn't expect that.
Well, we were always fighting the previous war, and now we had to learn in real time with the war that we're in. Yeah, and it's the
Right.
first time in our history we had to really do that. Probably since the Revolutionary War, to be honest with you. Yeah.
So it almost sounds like changing your position. You have to relearn the position, and what's his
Yes.
name? Olsen. Carl
Yeah,
Olsen
Carl
comes
Olsen.
in.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much was his knowledge that he imparted on you helped you understand and pivot. And again, I bring this thing up where s- mental toughness, I don't know, is always been presented in your environment or ecosystem in the way that
Yeah.
you brought up. Usually discipline equals freedom. That's it. End of story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
How
right.
did you teach this to your mates when it's such a foreign concept?
Yeah, you're talking about, like, when I was a young leader?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I didn't, right? Because I didn't have the mastery of the skills to teach it, and then I was also up against a lot of stigma, cultural stigma, because, I mean, we didn't even call it mental health services, which was all clinical in the hospital. Now we actually have embedded behavioral health specialists in every unit, who are uniformed people usually, right? And then you have mental performance coaches that are at a certain level that are available to you. You have institutional, but like then it was like we had no resources. And then there was all this negative stigma around anything having to do with mental. People thought it was going to ruin your career. So it was like, it's just something you didn't talk about, and my generation, comes from it's to suck it up and drive it on. We don't talk about your feelings. You don't ask why. You just do it, right? Because it's the right thing to do, or you were told to do it. And so for me, it was still very early, but Carl played a critical role because after my second deployment, he now had a PhD and he was the department head, and he brought me back without a master's degree to go help expand the Center for Enhanced Performance throughout the Army as the Army Center of Enhanced Performance. So we had this outreach mission, and we had at the time, this is 2009, I redeployed. My family moved to West Point. I was really going to pull off on the roadside of life and just kind of like reevaluate, do I want to continue this career or not? I'd already served my 5-year commitment. I could get out anytime. My wife had given birth to my second son. I'd missed that. It was a 15-month deployment. I saw a lot of combat. I really just wanted a break and just reintegrate my family. And I thought it'd be cool to work with the football team and maybe be the guy that Carl was when I was a cadet to help people who were really struggling. But then it just opened up my whole world to, performance psychology, the art and science of that, and the art of the possible. Because now we had these 6 sites. We were hiring people out of PhD and master's programs. Our first site was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. They were working with special forces guys. We were expanding, and now I was part of kind of running that outreach mission, but also going on the road doing this road show. Whenever a unit was getting ready to deploy, they didn't have it one of their installation. I was the trainer, so it was great. I had this massive strategic kind of oversight. I got a chance to be a trainer, and then I also got a chance to work with cadets at West Point. So it was probably the most important part of my career halfway through because I fell in love with something that I wanted to do to continue serving, right? Because at that point I had done just about everything that I wanted to do in the military, and I was strongly considering getting out.
Mm.
And my wife was too. And I think when I fell in love with this field and I was around all these amazing giants of my field, then and I it just really reinvigorated my sense of purpose and mission to want to continue serving in a different capacity as an expert in that area.
You use the word, not overuse it, but use it enough times to really drive home this idea of service. You said
Yeah.
service. I want to
Yeah, yeah.
serve.
Yeah.
And also, as I'm hearing your story, I hear about sacrifice.
Yeah.
You're overseas, and reading about you, I understand service and sacrifice are
Yeah.
important to you.
They are. They're my core
Uh,
their service is one of my principal core values. So that's why it comes out a lot. Yeah, it's what
I want to come back to this point of the story here, but my brain can't help but wonder
yeah,
if we go way back to Oakdale where you grew up.
yeah.
What seeds were being planted that really allowed, or what seeds primed you to be very service and
Yeah.
sacrifice orientated?
Yeah, it starts with my parents. I mean, shout out to my mom and dad. I lost my mom last year, 18 months ago too, but my
Mm,
parents were very much involved in the community, especially my dad. I mean, my mom was a homemaker and raised me at home, and my dad was an entrepreneur, ran his own independent insurance agency in a small town in the Central Valley. But like was very active. We were active in our church. My dad was a reader. I was a altar boy. I was raised Roman Catholic. So just and I loved being able to be a part of that process, being an altar boy, being there with my dad. My dad just modeled what that looked like. He was involved in the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary Club, so many different things. He was so active in the community. He still is. He's in his mid 80s. And actually, he's received several awards for community service, and a more recent one in our county. He runs our our history museum. And so like, and then my mom was just serving us at home too, right? And so obviously very active in our community, but my dad was really more out. My mom was more in. And I think it was just kind of being a part of something bigger than yourself. I think the second thing was being a Boy Scout. Obviously, community service, the outdoors and leadership are kind of the three things that you really learn as scouting. And I think, hey, volunteering at food banks, picking up trash, helping, conserving the environment, living the outdoor code, those things were like they were a requirement. They weren't optional. They're part of what you did. And so here I had this reinforcement at home. I had this reinforcement through scouting. And, also, I come from a family of fishermen, farmers, and fighters. The last one being, Army veterans. Both my grandfathers were in World War II, one Army, one Navy. My dad was a Vietnam era soldier. He did not deploy, but he helped secure the homeland, like responding to different riots. And then my sister served in Desert Storm. And then that's when it kind of this idea, her and my brother-in-law would then really planted the seed. Okay, well, this idea of becoming an army officer. So, we weren't like this huge army family, like, hey, bleed camo, bleed, army black and gold. It wasn't like that, right? But I think I had enough of that in me to where, all these things were coming together. We're going to a service academy, made a lot of sense. And so service has been woven into my family's DNA for a long time. And it's something I continue with my wife and I and our kids.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. Yeah, service, it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing when the world operates that frame.
Yeah. And ironically, it's where I teach the best quote. This is the measure of a life is in its service. That's the motto of Sam Houston State University. And I just think that's just the coolest quote. And I just think I couldn't think of a better quote that encapsulates, that's what I want on my tombstone, man. I say that here lies a servant, and the measure of his life is with his service for others.
Let me ask you a question. With your kids, let's say that they're having a conversation about who their dad was.
Yeah.
On that tombstone, not on the tombstone, who their dad was.
Yeah, sure.
Who were you?
Whew. Oh man. I just was somebody who, was willing to pour into others, with through relationships, through helping them, not only when they're through their struggles and through their triumphs, but just showed up for people and helped meet people where they're at, getting where they need to go, at different inflection points of their life. And then through that process of mastery, we were able to sharpen each other. Right. And so for me, I've had so many opportunities to be able to do that at different levels and different, organizational sizes and shapes and arenas. That's what it's really been about. It's this idea of mastery.
You talk about inflection points, and I'm super interested in inflection points. I think they're such important stages in our lives.
Yeah.
Whether it's working with the military, MLB, or NFL.
Right.
Can you talk about, you don't have to divulge names or anything, but a time where someone was at an inflection point and you met them where they're at, to use your words here, but they didn't really realize they need that.
Yeah.
Do you have a story?
I have so many stories, right? Especially recently with the Bears. I'll mention, there's two in particular. I won't mention names. Pretty easy to find if you want to look this up. But like, hey, when I first started working with the Bears, I worked with an offensive lineman who just was physically, had the makeup to be, one of the best at his position ever, right? But mentally just was in his own way, and so, he met me, had never, didn't know me from Adam, had never worked with anybody like me even before, but because he was open and he was curious, we developed a relationship. He got committed to training his mind and how to, control how he says self-talk, control his body language, how to bounce back from adversity, how to push through injuries for the sake of his teammates, how to leverage his motivational system that was a little bit different, how to find his purpose. And I think he ended up having a turnaround, a great season, and got some Pro Bowl votes. There's another guy who was a kicker who got cast away from another team on the West Coast, was the best kicker in the country, coming out of college in a power forward program, was drafted. He kicked in the Super Bowl and just had a rough patch. And he basically got booed out of his stadium and kicked off his team. And he basically was a rehab project, in many ways. And just helping working with him again. That guy never worked with someone like me to really work on his confidence and his process and how to his relationship with pressure, and then to be able to kick a game winner, on
Yeah.
national television and walk it off, and then get hired by the same team that we beat, that who beat us at the last play. I mean, that's just legendary stuff, man. And so those are just two of the more recent examples. I have so many. If you read my book, I'm gonna talk a lot about them. There's a lawyer that I worked with who went to Ranger School, and his wife had terminal can. His wife had not terminal cancer, but she had cancer, and they had young kids. And he was, and we worked on his character, man, and what was important to him, and when it was hard, and he was tired, and he was hungry, and he wanted to quit, how could he keep going, and he graduated, and he like credits me for helping it. I'm like, dude, you're the one who did this, man. But it's these small interactions that make a huge difference in people's lives. I'm always just amazed by that. And I think that's why there are no little things when it comes to, the mental game and mental fitness.
I like that there are no little things. Whether it's someone, the Bears or a lawyer or whomever,
Yeah.
for people listening who have individuals in their life that they need to meet them where they're at, what do those first conversations look like and feel like?
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of the check-in. And if you check out my TED talk, I talk a lot about this too. So it's understanding where you're at in this mental fitness bridge. So mental fitness is all about controlling how you think and respond under pressure consistently, right? So you can only control how you think and how you respond, right? And it works like a bridge. And we go back and forth between survival, on one side of the bridge, and resilience in the middle side of the bridge. So survival's in red, resilience is in yellow. When we can bounce back from adversity, we're not doing great, we're not doing bad. Survival modes mean we're just struggling, we're behind on sleep, we're sick, we're tired, we're injured, we're barely getting by. Resilient means I'm not great, I'm not bad, I'm doing okay, and I'm rolling with the punches. And then thriving is like, hey, I'm having my best days ever. I'm just crushing it. At the upper range of that, I'm in the flow or zone state. And so I think understanding that construct that we all go back and forth in that bridge, and that you can be in survival mode and still get the job done. The first step is, checking in with yourself and saying, where am I at on that mental fitness bridge? Surviving, resilient, or thriving? You can give it a 1 through 10 score if you want. 1 being survival, 10 being thriving, 5 resilient, and say, hey, where am I at right now? So like, how about you and I practice it right now?
Yeah.
So where are you at on the mental fitness bridge right now, Sean? Are you surviving, resilient, or thriving?
You know what? I think I was surviving before this call, and I'm
Okay.
not just saying it. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
thriving right now. I'm really enjoying this, and
Yeah.
I'm bouncing. I'm in a flowing motion right now where my spectrum is going back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Gotcha. If you were to give it a number, what number would you be right now?
Right now, I feel like I'm at like a 8 or 9 out of 10. I'm loving your conversation.
All right. Cool. You can pick one number. Is it 8 or 9
9,
or 10?
9.
All right. You're a 9. Okay. And so, and you said why you're a 9 too. So what's one thing that you could do between now and the end of the day to move it from a 9 to a 9.1 or a 9.2?
Debrief my notes from this conversation. That something I don't always do.
All right, cool. I love it. And then this is the fourth most important question, because now you have awareness of yourself. Now this is something you can do with other people to build empathy, which is awareness of others, and also compassion, which is being able to take action on the emotions and thoughts of others, right? Is this is the fourth most important question, which is what can I do to help you fight to the right?
What can you do?
Yeah, what can I do to help you fight to the right?
Fight to the right. I like that. Right now, keep having a very insightful conversation with me.
Yeah, that absolutely. That's easy, right? That's something I can do. Here's what's interesting, right? If you're watching this and you do that check in 30 seconds a day, just takes 30 seconds, and you do the beginning of your day, end of your day, right? One, you're going to build your self awareness, right? Because
Mhm.
many people go throughout their day, they don't think about how they think and how they feel. So we're completely unaware, right? It's like we're driving our car, right? And then, the car's driving along. We're not really paying attention. And so self awareness is like creating your own dashboard. So when the check engine light comes on, I know what to do to act on that because I'm in tune with my high performance engine, right? So self-awareness allows you to be able to regulate yourself, right? And then it also allows you to be aware of other people, right? I just got done watching Ford versus Ferrari, phenomenal movie. I watched it with my son yesterday, right? And it's that symbiotic relationship with man and machine, and your mind and your body. You can get more aware and in tune with that. You can master it. You can optimize the performance of the high performance engine, right? You pay attention to that. Now I'm in tune with you. So now when I say,
Mm.
"Hey, how are you doing?" And you see this all the time, especially people they say, "I'm good," and their body language says everything that they're not good.
Yeah.
We don't often don't check in with them because we don't know what to say. We don't
Mhm.
have the tools and the language to do that. That changes. Now you ask them, "Hey, what's going on? What can I do to help you?" Right? And it's about fighting to the right. So if you can work this with your family, your team. It doesn't have to be the bridge. It can be a series of emojis, like the pain scale that you see at the doctor. Smiley, it's frowny face and red. That's surviving, whatever that means to you. The meh middle face is the yellow, and then the happy face smiling is in green. It can be as simple as that. Do try it with your kids. That's where I started this, and then but then you got to ask, what can I do to fight? 9 times out of 10, when you're going to find that you ask people that, they're going to say, no, I'm good. Right. And eventually they're going to be like, thank you for asking. Right. It means that you give a shit about me and you're actually listening and leaning in. But and then, you may do that 1,000 times. And on the 1,001st time that you ask that, you built trust and rapport with that person, and you're going to be in a position to actually do something about it, right? And
Mm.
that could make the difference in somebody's day. It could make the difference in somebody person's life, right?
Mhm.
So there's huge implications on that to build self-awareness, empathy, and compassion for others. And just a simple check-in exercise that you can do for yourself. So I challenge you. It's my challenge to you, Sean, and your listeners. Do that for 7 days in a row, right? And write it down, right? And then I want you to take two people, one personal, one professional, and check in with them. Do it with somebody where you have psychological safety and you feel safe with, right? And then experiment with it, and then do that and get comfortable with that, and then use that shorthand with them to build your awareness. And you're going to find your connections are going to be a lot stronger too. So that's the check in.
I love it. Do you find that it also is cultivating an awareness that I have agency and maybe I
Yes.
don't always need you to do something for me, but
No.
that question is very helpful that you care, but
Right.
I have the power.
That's why the third question is goes before the fourth question, right?
Mhm.
Third question is you ask someone, what can you do?
Mhm.
What can you do to fight to the right? So now you're putting the ownership, which is I have the responsibilities about the process. So mental fitness is an individual responsibility. The accountability is about the results, right? Which you have to take action to do it. But life's a team sport, right? So you are now an accountability partner. You put ownership back on them to where they are first figuring out what they can do, if anything. Sometimes we're not in a position, especially when we're in survival mode. We may not be in a position to really do anything but weather the storm. Okay.
Mhm.
So, but if we're just thinking about what we need to do and taking small steps, we're more likely to improve our resilience and to be able to move towards thriving, right? But also then the fourth question then becomes, once I've asked you to take agency and control of how you think and how you respond, now I'm in a position to help you move to the right or fight
Mm.
to the right in this case.
Yeah, great. I love it. Is it simple in the process, but very impactful. So great.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 4 C's earlier, and
Yeah.
I don't want to gloss over that for the
Yeah. Sure.
listeners.
Right.
For the people listening, what are the 4 C's
Yep.
and how do they help us, whether we're
Yep.
running a business, raising a
Yeah.
family?
Yep.
athletes, etc.?
Yeah, so, I mentioned kind of like, hey, having the dashboard and the check engine light for a high performance engine. Well, you got to develop a GPS for success. So the 4C model serves as a way to navigate life and challenge, change, and adversity. And it's based on the 4C model of mental toughness. And you think about what is mental toughness and how does it relate to that mental fitness bridge? Mental toughness is the combination of mental resilience and mental performance. So it's the yellow and green part of the bridge. That's what it is. So mental health is a separate construct that's about treating psychological illness and injury. It's the medical model. So this is the training and education model. So the model that we use is that this is the most well this is the most efficacious psychological model that exists today. And the 4 C's are confidence, uh, control, commitment, and challenge. And so I deploy assessments that help people get objective about where they're at on these 4 C's. And there's four elements, and then it looks like a pizza, and there's different slices of the pie that are part of them. And you can go check that out. But there are certain mental skills, techniques, and processes that are the ingredients of the pizza that you can use, and modify for you. And so for example, confidence, self-talk. That's the first one we talk about, the narrative that you talk to yourself, right? We're talking about controls, it's mental imagery or attention control. Commitment is about goal setting or goal pursuit. And then challenge is about, understanding how you deal with stress and pressure, for example. So, but there's all kinds of skills that come out of that you can customize to the individual, the team, or even the enterprise organizational level.
Is there one that I'm thinking of which way to go with this question?
One that jumps out, like is most common.
I'm gonna let you pick. My mind's going, is there one that people skip because they think, that's easy? My
Yeah,
other
good
question
question.
was
Right.
gonna be, I'm letting you pick, is there one that if you do well, it makes the
Yeah.
other ones much easier?
So the point of entry doesn't matter, right? I think, but the
Mm,
point of entry, where you enter, the people ask me that all the time. If you had to pick one, where would you start, right? And for me, I think if I were to pick one, it'd probably be in their control, because I think people have to understand what they can and can't control. And then the natural point of entry from there, the foothold is now I control how I think and I respond. I understand psychological momentum that can help me and hurt me. And then that allows me to then enter in other things, right? So that would be the foothold that I would choose if I hadn't. But obviously the assessment allows me to like, hey, this is where my um this is where I sit in terms of my strengths and areas of improvement. And a lot of people like to start with the areas they need to improve upon the most. And to answer that question, the most common ones have to do with confidence, especially
mm,
young athletes. And I think just where we're at as a society, there's just a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of fear of missing out, a lot of comparison traps, a lot of people who just don't have that belief in themselves or their abilities, especially when they don't have success, and how they deal with failure, which is closely related to resilience. And the second one is dealing with stress and or pressure, which are two different constructs. So a lot of athletes dealing with pressure, but also a lot of like people in business, who are dealing with stress and
mm,
chronic stress and burnout. Those would be the 2 C's that I see. They're the most common, but if I had a choice, I would enter in with control.
mm. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, control, it allows for a lot of awareness. It allows for, I mean, if I could control many domains, my emotions,
Yeah.
my thoughts to some degree. I can't control them all, but if I control the
Right.
reaction, then
Yeah.
I'm doing well.
100%.
I still like this idea that we talked about that maybe um discipline and or grit. I've heard you talk about grit isn't the be all end all. They're beneficial, but they're maybe not
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Speaking about control, is there a
Yeah.
time, whether it was yourself or an athlete or leader you're working with, that you first started to realize that maybe grit and extreme discipline don't have as much as control as we think?
No, you're exactly right. So I talk about grits glass ceiling and talk about, hey, when to grit, when to quit, when to pivot, right? And I think this gets after those inflection points are when we have to go through a transition, right? Or we need to start thinking about what our plan B is. And I first realized this when I was in baseball, especially at the minor league level. It was when you enter in a sport, you have to the cultural blinders go on, and it's all about making it to the major leagues.
Mhm.
Hey, and it's this idea, burn the boats, go all in, right? Which is kind of homage to, Cortez and his conquest to defeat the Aztecs, but which is well known, and that's where I kind of, that whole idea. But it's when comes a time, I had worked with a guy he was 27 years old. He had two young kids. He wasn't making any money. He was at single A high ball, like one two levels above where he was. He hadn't, he'd been promoted and demoted twice, and he was kind of at this point where he's starting to wonder, hey, what am I doing with my life? Right. He didn't have a college education. He had a high school education. It was like all signs were pointing, you've seen that little magic 8 ball, all signs were pointing to yes when it comes to making a change. But he still had this fixation on making it the big leagues that had been hardwired into him since he was a young man. And but then the odds of making it to the big leagues and staying there are so small, it's like hitting the lottery. So I think it's kind of like me having to talk to him about starting to think about what, an alternative is and what that looks like was this process that really led me to believe that, hey, grit isn't what it's meant to be. Granted, as a society writ large, I think it's really easy to throw up our hands and say, well, kids these days, they're just quitters, right? And every generation always criticizes the younger generation. We dunked on millennials and millennials dunk on zillennials, and it just like it's this perpetual cycle, right? No one is ever tough or as good as your generation, right?
Mhm.
So I think that when I came across that, I realized, man, like there's definitely a glass ceiling when it comes to this, that it's not what it's meant to be. And there comes a time where you have to pause, reflect, again, like on this life's journey, you're navigating, you have to be able to take these moments to be able to stop, break out your map and compass and say, where am I going? Where am I now? And, and what do I need to do to get where I need to go? And I think when you do we do that on a regular basis, you're able to then make decisions that are, not always gonna be the right decisions, but you're certainly gonna be able to learn and grow and be able to take care of the things that matter the most to you, like your family, right? And like, your own health and well-being, like, how you want to make an impact, right? And I think when we just have blinders on and we're just constantly like, go that whole rise and grind thing, it doesn't work. And I also think just physically, I learned that in the military, it was all about sleep when you die,
Mhm.
suck it up and drive on, don't talk about your feelings, and that tough guy mentality that I see a lot of famous people make a lot of money who are veterans out there. It pisses me off, frankly, because it's like it's not. That's not what I am, and that's not about, and that's not what works, right? But it's making a lot of people a lot of money selling out energy drinks and supplements. So that's what I am the anti when it comes to that.
I guess I shouldn't tell you I woke up at 4 a.m., pounded out 700 chin-ups, 500 push-ups, ran half a marathon, brought my kid to school.
And you did it with a smile on your face.
It was
I mean,
great. Like I look great. I didn't even sweat. Um,
did you yell at anybody and tell them why they suck and they're a pussy, anything like
the
that, or
whole time at school, I
the
was
whole
calling these
time
dads
you're trash
lethargic
talking them?
dads. Yeah. My
Yeah.
son was like, "Dad, what are you doing?" I was
Look,
like,
and
"You'll understand."
some people are not into that, but if that's your thing, then I'm not for you, right?
Mhm.
Because I think I'm, I think tou my credit card, my calling card of toughness kind of speaks for itself, right? I don't need to beat my chest
Mhm.
and talk about how tough I am, but I'm looking at a whole nother idea of what actually toughness means, especially as a man, and that ain't it.
Mhm. Well, I feel like a lot of your work in resilience, working at the epicenter of where this work was being done
Yeah.
with the leaders, probably has allowed you to understand what resilience actually means. And
Yes.
sometimes it is pivoting, it's quitting, it's stopping what you're doing
Yeah.
with intention.
Yeah.
And for me, as I'm listening to you, there's a big difference between quitting because it's hard and I
Yeah.
don't want to do that versus quitting like, this square peg in a round hole is not working.
Not serving you. It's not
Hmm.
serving you, right? And, and it's gonna lead to bad outcomes eventually, right? Something's gonna give, right? And so for that young man, what's it gonna be? Your marriage, your kids, your health, and a lot of people, because again, they don't have that dashboard, it's the engine smokes and it compounds and it shuts down, right? And then it's
Hmm.
too late, right? And so we want to get ahead of that curve and do the preventative maintenance and soup up the engine ahead of time. So before it leads to a more proactive approach is what's necessary. And that's what I'm about.
Mm. So I'm looking at the conversational plane is going to come down to, at some point here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
my mind is very much rooted in well-being and our relationships with money.
Yeah.
When you sit across from athletes who make more than some people make in a decade,
Yeah.
our leaders or whomever you're working with,
Right.
what's it like sitting across from someone when their entire identity, in a way, no, I shouldn't say entire after you've worked with them, but a lot of their identities wrapped up in the scorecard of the stats of the achievement,
Yeah.
and with one wrong play, they could be injured and this could disappear.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
have you noticed on the scorecard of life or
Yeah.
the outcome or the identity of life defined by the scorecard? And how have you seen if at all money plays a role in this?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I think they could be tied to each other. They can or cannot be tied to each other, right? As well, and I think it's especially challenging when I see a lot of like elite athletes or even people who are the Oka breadwinners. It could be male or female. Where there's a lot of people who are relying on them, right? And they become the tide that floats all the boats financially, right? And um, I think that puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on people like that too. So when the day comes where they cannot be that breadwinner, they cannot be the financial tide that raises all the boats, that has a deep tie, a deep cut into their identity
Mm,
as the person who is taking care of other people, right? And there's a lot of so I think there's a lot of fallout that's related to that. I think there are a lot of players. There's a lot of especially at the college level, but the business aspect of sport, for better or for worse, is now at the forefront. So, like in football, for example, and you see this, of course, in your listeners in Canada, who are making money earlier in their career as well, too, right? So, when you have to become financially literate and you have a relationship with the psychology of money earlier on, I think allows you to be more responsible and kind of disconnect from the identity piece, right? Who I am is not the bank of so and so, right? I'm a provider, right? But I have to be able to take care of myself first. And oh, by the way, not everybody's getting access to my account. And sometimes I got to cut people off, right? I think that's another talent thing is when you need to cut people off because they are, distracting you and taking away from your goals on and off the field, right? So I think I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that
mhm,
those are some of the complications that I'm seeing. And the other piece I'm seeing a lot right now in college is a lot of people from underprivileged areas who come with single family homes, don't understand how to manage their money and the idea of responsibility and accountability. And then they get this freedom. They want freedom and they have this opportunity, but then they don't understand. They don't have the systems and the processes to be able to help manage doing the adulting piece when it comes to paying rent, paying their utilities, saving money, making a budget, doing all those things. And so I'm really lucky that we've got some people in place who are just great mentors and father figures for men who don't have father figures. Shout out to
mm,
Joe Person at Lamar University, who just invested in the community and helping these young men, even when they're done playing at Lamar, for example, to help bring them up. And I think hopefully a lot of institutions have more of those people, but you have to have people who are teaching skills because it's not happening, people earlier in their career in their lives, right? So it would be great for my wife's an educator. I think I'm seeing more opportunities for kids to actually learn some of these financial literacy skills earlier in their lives when they're in middle school and high school, which would better serve them, especially if they don't go to college or they go to college and they go to a trade or, they go into the workforce right afterwards. I think the earlier we can help people understand, their relationship with money, the better they're going to be.
mhm. Yeah, thanks for that. It really sounds like it starts with this quiet pressure that starts to build into
Yeah.
a much louder pressure at times, if
Yeah.
not
Right.
discussed and paid attention to. How about for yourself? You're 20 years in the military, you're working now as a coach.
Yeah.
What has money taught you that
Mm.
surprised you? And what has money or what have you learned that isn't true that you thought was true about money?
Oh man. Yeah, so I've had a really complicated relationship, but I could probably use your help with that too. Like I hated dealing with money. Like I was really adverse to it, and maybe it's because I had this kind of like hardcore belief with the numbers. And so, like for example, my wife was always the person who she managed the house, she managed the money, the bills, and so on and so forth. And then when I became, so for me, I did something I didn't want to deal with, right? And it was so I would outsource it, right? So I think you know, that was not being involved, in basic muscle movement decision making. I was involved in that, but I was focused on the mission, right? But then when I retired, and especially when I started my own business, I think one of the things, how the basic accounting of things, with P&L sheets and learning those things the hard way. I don't have a formal business degree, but understanding taxes and, I think the misconception I had, I didn't know that you had to spend money to make money. I know that's a very common thing, but in terms of investing in your system to develop your system to then create wealth and revenue was a big thing that I had to learn, especially for someone who's in my business to where, my product is me and my
Mhm.
services. And, I have to invest in myself in order to be able to get my name out there for more people to then, hire me to speak or listen to my podcast so they get awareness about what mental fitness is, that you can train your brain and that you should think like an athlete. And that and there's this whole system to help you do that. Well, for the system to eventually sell itself, I have to invest in myself, right? And I was very adverse to doing that because I was used to kind of bootstrapping it and just kind of figuring it out and not wanting to go into debt to do that. So I think learning that most businesses are built on debt was a big learning lesson that I had to learn as a business person, but also to get comfortable being uncomfortable with dealing with money,
Mhm.
and a last thing I'll share is being able to, like in the military, even though you're everybody knows what you make, me being comfortable with the negotiation with knowing my worth and being able to ask, negotiate prices and dealing with money in real time with people was something that I had to learn how to do that and be comfortable with that and learn how to stand on my own business and say when to say no when the cost didn't equal the benefit or it wasn't a strategic decision that would, eventually lead to revenue or a relationship or something that would serve my mission.
Thank you for that. I appreciate how much thought that you put into there. It's something that we all dance and at times wrestle with. So thank you so much. As we come to an end here, my last like question for you, and then I have a standard one I ask everyone is
Yeah.
we opened up talking about you as the artist,
Yeah.
the painter. I love your through line of mental fitness is trainable.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think the listeners really will take away is that this is trainable. And in
Yeah.
fact, it does need attention.
100%.
Can you expand on your approach that coaching mental fitness is an art and a science? This is how we
Yeah.
bring the picture back in.
Yeah. I love that. Great way to tie it up there too. So, I really kind of got this to, I think it was like a Bruce Lee quote one of my mentors had, right? And when he talked about martial arts, like there's an art and a science to it, right? So there's the science is the objective data, the truth, sorry, the facts. So that's like that is the behavioral science, the neuroscience, the social science that goes into it. These are what does it say that, hey, what actually works, what doesn't work, what is, and then what are the evidence-based best practices that we know based on our experience with different populations. So that's the science, right? And for me, I'm, a scientist first, right? It's all about, hey, I don't do anything that, is pop psychology, right? I'm about innovating and trying things out, but nothing is based on just me making shit up, right? I think that's irresponsible. And I think there's plenty of bullcrap that's out there that is, hacks and apps and, quick fixes. And there are no quick fixes. Training requires effort and energy and recovery and rinse and repeat, right? So there's the science, but the art is actually how do you bring it to life, right? And so that is like me understanding this, taking a sometimes otherwise concepts that I can't see, they're not tangible, I can't touch them, I can't feel them because they're in my head and other people's head. How do I bring them to life? So how do I train them? And the way you do that is by applying them in different arenas and contexts and with repetition and sets. And then every time that happens, you have brain cells that fire together and wire together and form these new patterns that you didn't have before. And then those become habits and routines that then become innate and just who you are. Right. And so I think when we take that same approach to just like we lift weights, we do push-ups, you do your yoga, you do your nutrition, right? That are tangible and you can measure them so they get managed. We can measure our mental fitness and we should do that and take the same approach. And the best way to do that is by integrating them into other things because now it brings it to life. And how you bring it to life through whether it's teaching and the educational side, whether it's training, whether it's coaching, is something that, I'm constantly balancing the art and the science to make people a masterpiece. That's what it's about.
Make them a masterpiece. I like that. Humans aren't just a research paper, but we need it as a guide. But I really appreciate that you remain being human in your conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Andy, my last question that I've asked everyone is, let's now imagine that you're at end of life. It doesn't matter how old you are, but you find yourself sitting on a front porch.
Yeah.
You're looking out at a view that gives you complete peace, ease, and a sense of content. You're feeling content. You
Right.
decide to write or bring out a notebook to write your children's children a lesson you lived or a lesson you learned was key for living a meaningful life. What would
Yeah.
that lesson be?
Oh man. Always wear your white belt.
Always wear your white belt.
Yeah, have a white belt mindset, right? And
Hmm.
so I think to develop black belt skills, you have to have a white belt mindset, and that comes from the story about Jigaro Kano, which I won't bore you with, but you can check it out. I have an article about it on my LinkedIn page. It'll be in my book. Again, another shameless plug for that too. But I think you can develop these black belts in life in these areas of expertise, but real mastery and a meaningful life is about wearing what being curious and being authentic and being willing to learn and try and fail in the arena. And then that's how you create other black belts, right? So to have black belt skills, you got to have a white belt mindset. And and we have so many lives within this one life, we can't live them all, so having a white belt mindset also just shows up every day in the present moment, making the best you can with what you have.
I love that. I love that. Andy, thank you so much. For listeners who are interested in your books, your work, your
Yeah.
podcasts, where would you point them towards?
Yeah. So I would say, I'll have my link in the bio here too, so you can check it out too. So right now, like my big thing is to find me is my speaking. If you want to hire me for your next event, for your next professional development, your lunch and learn, whatever it is in person. Otherwise, go to my website, andyreise.com, ANDYRIISE.com. That's my speaking website. You can get my bio, my speaking kit. It also has my TEDx talk and sizzle reel on there. And then also check out my podcast. That's Skull Sessions Podcast, The Art and Science of Kicking Ass Between the Ears, where it's a mental fitness and leadership podcast. Again, where we're talking about the practical and tactical tools to help you, perform, lead, grow, and win from within. And then also, if you're interested in my coaching services or my workshops, you can check out Design to Perform, which that's what that's all about too. But you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. That's where my kung fu is the strongest on social. But I would definitely hit me up on my website, follow me there, and yeah, I'd love to be able to be a resource for you.
Thank you so much. We'll include all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean. Get after it, man. We'll see you in the arena.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really did. What I took from this is many things, but this idea that mental toughness isn't something that you're born with. It's not an innate talent that you just were born with. Instead, like Andy talked about, it's something you can train, which is great for us leaders, business owners, parents. Andy talked about a lot. The hardest battles really are the 8 inches between your 2 ears. And the hope of Andy's work and this episode is that awareness that we can focus on them and train them and make a difference. So my question for us this week is, what's the one thing you've been calling a weakness that perhaps is just something untrained? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. If you've been enjoying the You Potential podcast, I have a favor. can you share this episode or any other episodes with a family, friend, or colleague, someone you think who would enjoy this? Spreading the word on the podcast really helps other people like you discover the wonderful conversations that we're having. And please subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.